people face when we do a localization project from scratch. I've tried to aim it at a level where everybody's involved, so some of it will be a bit simplistic for people like you. You've been doing this longer than I have. But really, I would like to do some presentations and introduce the current topics and some of the new stuff as well. But really, if anybody has any questions or wants to jump up or say something as we go through the talk, or you have areas that you think are more interesting to carry on talking about, I'm happy to do this as a discussion rather than just a presentation, because an hour and a half of listening to me talking generally makes people fall asleep. So we will. The aim is to kind of share experiences, to try and talk about issues we've had, so that if you guys then come across those issues in your next project, or you come across to see them, you get an idea of how other people have faced those challenges and answered it. Because we don't have all the answers. A lot of other people have tried different things, but at least if you have an idea of what other people have done, then you can choose which one approach to use when those challenges come in. And the aim should be at the end to say that you guys can go off and do your localization strategies and make sure that you get the best out of that part of your work. Not that everybody does it every day, but when you do get a challenge, the strategy will work. And hopefully we learn from this, as we always do. So I've kind of structured a little bit into 4 sections. First, just going through the translation process and what we actually do normally from start to finish of a translation or a localization project. So the world of translation and localization splits between people who from the outside call it translation, or from the inside call it localization. I hadn't really heard what localization was until 2 years ago when I started really getting into it. But it means translation is the smaller part of it, the whole thing is localization. But for starting principles, it's the same thing. You've got to get it communicated in a different language in a different place, so you need to work out the best way of getting that communication going. Second part goes on about the different types of projects and files. So I see things simply, there's kind of simple files and there's difficult files, but there's a lot of overlap and things are changing, and these days everybody's working with different media, so it's not just a brochure, it's not just old-fashioned hard print. There is every type of communication. Digital is now part of the mainstream. So that has to be considered. I've put a final step in there because even though translation normally is just the words, in the end you want your marketed or your communication message to get out there in the format it wants to go out there. So it's not just translation, but it's putting together the final document, file, what we call DTP or digital DTP, and that is considered still part of the process. We do that and other people do that. You've got to decide who does that last step. And then finally, I've just mentioned a few of the current technologies that can help, that are being used. We've got a talk later on by Roberto, who's our future gazer. Mystic Meg kind of look into the future. But this is really just focusing on what we've got currently being used. So, okay, I'll go straight in to the process. So, I'm just going to go through the steps that are generally used. There's a few steps before this, like quoting and working out how much we're going to charge you, or somebody's going to charge you, and kind of getting the concepts and defining the project. I've really focused a bit more into what happens when it comes in to get the actual process done, but absolutely defining the project, defining what your needs are, how many countries, whether you've got a budget for it, is a step before this, but that's kind of something that we all do at every project. I try to focus on stuff that's specific for translation, which is and localization. So a normal translation will have 2 steps. It will have the translation done by one person, and it will have revision. Okay, in the olden days, this pretty much is not called proofreading by a lot of people. And I don't want to cause confusion, but I'll go in a minute to the reason why it's now called revision, because that's been defined by the quality standards. And I think everybody here, does everybody work with some kind of quality system? ISO 9001, probably the one that kicks everybody off into the bane of life. And in the pharma world, we have all kinds of quality systems, GMP, GCP, good manufacturing practice. So the quality system is defined at the second step, we call revision, but that really means you have a second translator or a second person, an expert in the language, looking over what the first person did, and between the 2 of them you try and get some agreement, and that is your translation. And that is the normally defined way of doing it. You can have a second revision step if you really want to be careful. If people's lives are involved in the pharma industry, they tend to want to have 2 steps to try and get it to work. Sometimes, and not every time, people ask for back translation. It doesn't generally add that much, and we'll talk about that later, but it can be done. QA, so quality assurance, somewhere checking whether what's been done is good and bad, and there's ways of doing that, and I'll talk a bit about that. Client review, so this is you guys, or this is your stakeholders, or somebody else having a look. Regulatory approval, in the pharma industry this can be sent off to ethics committees, it can be sent off to the final users. You guys, you're looking at the legal departments, you're looking at whoever makes that final call. And then what we like to remind people is that any changes that have been suggested by the clients or the regulator, it's good if that gets checked by somebody else. Because just because they're the legal department doesn't mean they actually can spell or that they can actually do grammar. So it is worth getting it checked again, so it goes out. And then finally we've got the layout. I just put desktop publishing, but again there's different types of layout. Another question is, do you ever get it checked after it's been laid out? Does it go back to some in-country speakers to check that the layout didn't introduce errors? And that's a tricky game, because if you ask your in-country people to do it, they tend to go, oh yeah, I've looked at it, it's fine. Questionable. So here we go, ISO. There is a European standard for quality on translation. It's called EN 15038. Behind that, of course, most people have got the ISO 9001, which is how your whole company runs its quality. And this defines some different steps. I didn't put the definition of translation, because most of us know translation is the first step. But it defines the second step as revision, or to revise. And proofreading comes down at the bottom as the final check of your document, even though a lot of people still call it translation and proofreading. So it's an ISO definition, and it's got some definitions of review and reviewer. So it's in there, and that's why this term revision has come in, and it goes into our quotes, but it is just the second step. And one interesting thing about this, eventually we're going to have a worldwide standard for translation called 17100, which will be the ISO, which will be the European version. But at the moment, the powers that be are having arguments between the US standard and the European standard. So it was meant to be done next year, maybe the year after, who knows. So there will be an ISO version, but at the moment it's just the European. And one thing that says, they define a way a project should run. So in this standard, you should always go translation, revision, checking, that's the standard way. However, for some clients, if you've got a good in-house group of reviewers, then you don't always follow the whole process with your translation company. You can just do the translation with them, do the review yourself. Overall, the project has all the steps, but the bit that was done in our company or a company is not necessarily got the whole step in it. So they may have to put a little disclaimer at the bottom saying this has not been run to the full EN 15038. But that doesn't mean we're not doing that as a whole standard, it just means that that project's not being run in that way. We don't want to be dictated to by the standard, we want to make sure we're dictated to by what the clients need. So if you see that at the bottom, don't panic, it doesn't mean we've given up on it, it just means that maybe the way we're running that project doesn't fit with the strict framework of a defined quality system. Okay, so as I said, the industry standard is one revision step. We will always do, or most companies will do some kind of QA step, but how you do a QA step when you don't speak Chinese is one of the challenges in life. As I said, people can do the in-house revision with the proofreading or not. Sometimes you can just do a straight translation without the second step. You know, if it's going to go out for public use, I would recommend that you have two people's opinion on whether it's translated properly. If you're just doing an internal document, sometimes you can get away with it quick and easy. So there are different levels of quality you can do. Costs go with that, of course, if you want to go for the cheap stuff. But, you know, find out whether it's appropriate. Find out what level of quality is appropriate. And then, I'm now going to just kind of look at how do you find out how do you improve the quality of a translation. So if I've got a document and I send it off to a company and say, I want it translated into Chinese, and it comes back, and I've got this nice document now in Chinese, and I look at it, and I have that blind panic of, is it any good? Is it even the right stuff? Have they just cut and pasted it from some version of Chinese they found on the internet and just shoved these characters in? I have absolutely no way, myself, of knowing how good it is. So it is a kind of a black box, a blind project when you're in languages you don't have that expertise. If you're a big company, you can send it off to your local offices. If you're a 40-person company and you're all based in Slough, outside London, it's unlikely that you'll have a Chinese speaker in your company. So then you're left with that challenge of looking at the quality. So really, first thing to do is, if you're building good quality into the process, then you have more faith that what comes out the other end is going to be good, even without any actual secondary checking. And so some of the ways to make sure the quality works is you find the appropriate. I put good up here, and my colleagues pointed out that good doesn't have the full story. They can be a really good medical translator and have absolutely no feeling for the marketing side. Or they can be a brilliant marketing translator and not understand the medical terms. So it's not just good, it's appropriate. I stand corrected on that. And it's a good point. So, you know, finding the translators that are suitable, and that will build in the quality when the translation's done. Having a good process, the ISO defines a process, but we do a little, good quality translating companies will ask you if you can keep the same translator all the way through the document. If it's a 40-page manual, that could take 2 years to translate if you use the same person. But if it's just a one document that's been read as a marketing document, if you have 2 or 3 translators working on it, you may get completely different styles at different points. So the quality can be discussed as keeping the translator throughout, at least have the same person do the revision, because that will give some consistency. And how many revision steps? You can build in consistency. A human error will be that sometimes you get bored and you translate the same thing differently, just because the same word comes up again and say, oh, I don't want to translate the same way, I'll come up with a slightly different word. You can use translation memories, you can use software to see whether the same phrase is being translated the same way all the way through. You can build in consistency if you want the consistency. If you want to make it more interesting, let's put different versions in. There are QA steps people can do. You can use software to look for mistakes. You can use software to look for inconsistencies, and then you see whether that inconsistency is meant to be there, or was it just a mistake. You can look for typos. We're all aware of Microsoft Word with the little squiggles underneath, and it tells you that it's been spelled differently. Sometimes it's just American spelling, so you overrule it. But it still can be there. And ideally, don't rush. That's a nice idea. In the real world, it's normally, this needs to be done by next Monday, how can we get it done? But if you can build in the time, as Usha was saying, plan the time in, the not rushing will get your quality up. Okay, translation is not a science. I like things that have a straight, simple answer. How do you translate this? There's only one way of translating it. It doesn't work that way in reality. You're always going to get different opinions. Your local office will read and say, that's not the right way. How do you know that your local office has the right answer and that translator with 20 years experience was wrong? How do you reconcile 2 different people's opinions, especially again if it's completely blind and you're not lucky enough to speak that language? And it's a really difficult question. Then you get a 3rd opinion, you send up to another person, then you have 3 different opinions. Then you send up to another person, you have 4 different opinions. You know, do you go with 2 people who think it's the right, but they could be both wrong, and then one person who's better? It's really hard to get to bring those together. So one of the things that, if you have experience with a translator, sometimes you have a go-to translator who just does that last review, and they're the one you trust because you've used them for a long time. But you need to know that translator. Or you can work with a database. If those people have done good work before in that area, it builds in that trust that they're the people you go to. So it's a database, it's experience. If you just go and search on the internet and pull the first person off who translates into Italian, you just have no experience on whether they're good or bad. So that question of reconciling different people's opinions is part of the real skill of a project manager in localization, because there's no correct answer. And then finally, I was talking about, you know, is this specialist knowledge you want and technical ability, or is it, so legal and medical are classic examples of that, or is it a softer skill, you want them to be sympathetic? There are more subtlety to that. Some people will spend a long time in the English targeting their language towards a certain sector, so towards a certain age group. If you've got a paediatric or you've got a communication to kids, and then it gets translated into a formal way, you've lost all that effort. So again, you sometimes need to put briefs around it and really find the way of getting that sympathetic translation, not just a correct translation. So these are the tricks. One thing was we try and avoid splitting the work between different translators, but if your time constraints say you can't do that, sometimes you've just got to get it translated quickly and then try and revise it through. So it's a discussion situation. You know, better quality if you do, but you want the one final proofreader at least to have seen the whole document, and then they try and bring it in together because they've had to read through the whole thing. Back translation. We do less and less of back translation these days. It seemed to be at one point it was the ultimate way to check, because it is a blind. So what you do is you get it translated into another language, you take that translation, give it to another translator to take it back into English, if English is your starting language, and those people have never seen the original, so you compare the original with the back translation, and at least it tells you that everything has not been lost. Okay, but if you find a discrepancy, where did the discrepancy come from? Did it come from your forward translation, or did it come from your backward translation? How do you know which one was better? So you've got that reconciliation, it takes a long time, and it doesn't necessarily improve the quality of your forward translation. So, in some ways, it's a good way of removing the blind elements. If they just auto-filled some text that made no sense at all, you'll never be able to get it back into the original text. You could just use machine translation for that. Just have a quick look, take the whole text, show it into Google Translate, see if it actually is relevant to what it was meant to be. But, I don't know. So back translation can be done, but it doubles the price of your project, at least. Well, not completely, but pretty close to doubling, because you're doing a whole translation back again. So you've got to be careful with budgets of whether you use back translation. And we would suggest there are often better ways of doing quality assurance or quality check on the forward translation rather than just doing a back translation on every part of your work, and cost constraints normally come in. Okay. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Emma to do these next few slides, because these are talking about the tools that we use, or the people use, in the day-to-day work of running a translation. So there are specific software. Do you want to do the next one, or do you want to do this slide?
If you go through that one.
I can do that one, you can do the next one. Okay, so there are softwares that are out there that have been brought together to say, this is how we're going to take a project and run it as translators. So I focused here on the computer-aided translation, or CAT tools. The one we use mostly is Trados Studio, the other one's MemSource, WordBee. And what these are meant to do is, you normally have your translators have the software, you have the software, it controls the flow of that translation. So it means that translators can't just accidentally delete or miss out a paragraph. It separates out normally into segments, and you translate those segments so it's easier to look in a bilingual table, the translators to review it. It really just helps the flow. What can they do? One thing that a lot of people miss is these things have been designed and worked very hard on so they will work with your file. You don't need to extract all the text from your website and send that to us as a Word document. You don't need to take out all the text from your InDesign document, as long as it's not a fixed picture. These things will try and extract that text, put it into a table, work with that file, and then regenerate the file at the end with the translated text in. So there's some pretty snazzy software stuff in here, if we can work out a way of using it. You would not believe how many people still manually go and take all the text out, send you an Excel sheet or a Word document, and then manually put it all back in at the end. So do be aware that these CAT tools, CAT tools, can do that, and it's well worth looking, and I'll talk that through the talk. Another thing they can do is they will analyse the number of words. So yes, you can put it into a Word document and have a look and just see the little number of words in the bottom. You tend to quote based on words, so that's important. But they'll also look for repetitions and fuzzy matches, which is what Emma will talk through. And that can save you money and improve the consistency. So again, here we are helping the quality, because they'll come up with suggestions of how your translation can stay consistent and can save time and cost, both of which generally are quite important. They enable use of translation memories, which we're now going to talk about, and generally they will keep control of the tracking and the version control. They'll have a system built in to look at where the changes came through, so you can track who said what about what changes. Okay. Emma? Me?
I was waiting for the screenshot ones to explain how it all works.
There.
Yeah, so
okay, so I'll quickly go through this one. A lot of people talk about translation memories. This is one of the technologies that are used, and when I first came to the industry I didn't really know what a translation memory is, so I thought I'd just put it in here, give you a quick introduction. A lot of you know about it, but it does give you a background to what it means when someone says, oh yeah, translation memory, yeah, we're charging you for that. And actually, you can have a charge for maintaining a translation memory, so it helps if you know what we're charging for, or what company's charging for. So what these are is, it looks to put in the memory what has been translated before, so that you're not paying again for the full new translation. It makes sense, and there's discussions of big data. I don't know whether you're going to talk about it, but there could be a world, internet translation memory. Everything that's ever been translated could be out there on the internet somewhere, and you could just grab that data. So the minute you use your big data, you put something up in English, and it comes up with 5 suggestions immediately on what those are. And there's a program I was using, a Microsoft thing, which will do a search as it is. You put a word in, and it gives you about 5 and the source of where those different word translations come from. It's a bit better than Google Translate, basically. So yeah, you can use the internet, but what we normally do is you have your own localized translation memory just for your project. Actually, there is a discussion of just for your company, maybe. Because if you've paid for that translation, and somebody else is using the translation memory, who's paid for the original translation? Who owns the original translation? Can you own a translation? I don't know, it's tricky. But the short term is you have that memory or that database of those translated terms, but normally it's a sentence based, so this sentence is translated this way. It can be word based, it can give you different suggestions, but it is a memory. Within one document it can aid the consistency, because it will always suggest that you translate the same thing the same way. However, be careful. In German, in French, there are 2 or 3 different ways of saying the word you. So whilst the English says, I'd like to give you this study, this document, depending on whether it's a formal you or it's the second bit later on, and we did a document that was the same document, but half of it was aimed at the parents, half of it was aimed at the children. And surprisingly enough, the same phrase for the parent bit was formal, for Z, or the French word, I can't remember, and the bottom bit is the informal for the children was for do. But the English phrase was exactly the same, because we only have one word for you, and we just don't bother. So if you're using the translation memory and it looks for a perfect match and automatically fills it in, you've still got to be careful and get your translator to check whether the context works. So it helps, but it's got to be carefully looked. It can give you a cost saving, so we will charge less or very little or nothing if it's a direct repetition, because it does make life quicker. You can autofill formatted text. That's nothing to do with translation. That's the system. But you're helping quality control. So translation memories helps it spotting typos because you see the memory. And then there are some subtle things. So we had a phase where they always used a code for the study, and you got welcome to the ABCD study. So immediately when you get the next study, which has the same phrase but just a slightly different code, it starts looking for the similar and starts trying to autofill the translation of that into this, because it's pretty close. It's got 1 character difference. You think, oh, that's pretty close. We don't spot it. So what you can do is there are more subtle things where you can put this one in here and say, don't ever accept that one because that's a trademark or a well-known thing from the last work. Always look for the new phrase, because you know that last study was code marked or trademarked this name, you're now into a different area. So you can just switch the trademark through if you've got the same phrase but you've got a different product, but it's always turn the printer on, turn the F2468 printer on, and you can just change the F2468 to the F2469, and you can get the phrases. So you can be subtle and clever and still use the memory, but it's a slightly different memory. So there are little functions. Over to you, Emma, to talk about how it actually works.
Has anyone seen translation memories or captures? I imagine you could demonstrate, and that it's all new to everyone. Yeah. So what happens is we use the software and we set up projects, different file settings and all sorts of things that you don't really need to worry about to prepare a quote, and then it'll prepare files for translation that we send out to the translator. This is an example of translation memory. So when we've done one project for a new client, we would put files that have been translated and approved by reviewers into the translation memory, so it pulls in the English and the target language. So you can see there, it's got English sentences down the left-hand side and then the German translation on the right-hand side. So if anything was ever to come up in new projects with the same sentences or similar sentences, the information from the German column would be pulled into the file analysis, which is what we use for a word count, and then that could be recycled and kept the same, so it's used for consistency. So say, I don't know how clearly you say it, so segment 15 there says school programme content, and then there's the German on the right hand side, so if that sentence popped up in the file again, it would pull from the translation memory so that we know how it's been translated before. Next one. So when a translator is working in a translation memory, they can type in specific terms if they're looking for, an example there is education. So maybe their sentence isn't matched in the translation memory, but they think presumably this word's popped up before, so they can just have a quick search and then they can see how education's been translated and they can recycle that to keep it consistent with preferred client terminology. Again. So this is an example of a file that a translator would work in, and when it's linked to a translation memory. So it opens up again. It looks similar to the translation memory where you have source text on the left-hand side and you put in the target on the right-hand side. So again, in this case, it's German. So at the very top there, it's marked as 100% match, which means it's come up before in a previous document, so it's in the translation memory, and that's populated in the translator's target file. So it's marked as 100% match so that they can still check it, because it could be that the context of what comes before or afterwards, it does need any editing. So they can still go on and change that, but generally it's going to stay the same as it is. Just below that is an example of what Mark mentioned before, which is a fuzzy match. So that's what it's called when it's not 100% match, but it's given a percentage. So there you can see there's a 91% match. So something very similar has been translated before, but it's not exactly the same. So in the bottom there, that shows the translation memory, which is what comes up when the translator is working. And on the left-hand side, you can see in track changes, it's got national schools instead of primary schools, so that's the only word that's changed. So the translator then knows what they need to edit in that sentence. So what's in there at the moment is the translation for primary schools, and all they need to do is go in there and edit it to change it to national schools. So obviously that's a lot less work for them than translating from scratch, because it's already there of what's been in before. Go on, next one, please. Yeah, one more. So then this is an example of what would happen if there's no matches at all from the translation memory. It's just that the segment's blank and the translator would need to work in it and obviously put in their own translation. Obviously before they can type in certain keywords, so if they wanted to look for teachers' education programme, they could see if it's there. But as it's not shown up as a fuzzy match, it's highly unlikely rather, that it is there. But they can always check for the odd word or two. You can also see that in the left-hand side in English, it's got 4 more information in bold, and it's got 2 purple bits on the other side, and they're called tags. So that keeps the same format in the target text for when it comes to the end document. It'll retain the bold text. So the tags will be replicated in the target text to keep everything the same. So this is an example of what we'd send out for client review after the files have been translated. They get returned to the translation agency. Usually there'll be an in-house QA check, make sure everything's been translated, that numbers are the same, because obviously people don't all speak every language, so we can't check the actual text. And then you can generate word tables, which this is an example of, and this is usually what we send out for a client review. Switch track changes on, so that the reviewer can change what they want in the target. We always ask them not to change the source, because that's a whole different issue if they start rewriting the source text. They'll put on changes in the target file using track changes, and then they'll come back to your translation agency so they can see what's being changed. And it's clearer that way. And that's the long and short of how the translation software works.
And if we can get it working, you can save a lot of time and get rid of a lot of challenges. So, talking about track changes on here, if you can get the track changes that will automatically upload the changes back into our system, you have a document that's live and all the changes that have been asked for by the client are automatically put in. If you turn off track changes, if you send us as a PDF and somebody puts little stickies on it, or if people are doing it a different way, then our project managers have to manually go through and put those changes back into the master file. Not a problem, we do that, but it adds an extra step and a possibility of transcription errors. So if we can keep the steps automatically done, it gets better consistency. And then finally, one of the subtleties that we don't always see, if you've just taken your text out and you don't know where the formatting is, then when it gets translated, you don't always know which bit is going to be formatted. So if the word welcome to the study is bolded, welcome, if you've got it with these tags on, the translator should always tell you which part of that text should be bolded for the word welcome. It's easy in German because it tends to be the first word. Willkommen, I can spot that from 20 yards away. But if I'm trying to I've got a translation and I'm trying to put the document back together, and it's a Japanese translation and nobody's actually told me which bit of that Japanese sentence has the word welcome in it, it gets pretty darn hard to extract that. And I've done that, cutting and pasting each bit into Google to try and find out which bit means welcome, and it turns out it's about halfway through the sentence down the bottom. So suddenly your formatting of welcome to the study doesn't have the same impact, so it goes da 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 da, welcome somewhere down in the middle of your text. So if you haven't got the formatting sorted or carried through in the translation, sometimes you miss the subtlety, and it's frustrating to have to send the whole thing back to a translator just to get that formatting put back in at the end. So
another thing I've got to say, you can see at the top there it's coloured in green. You can, when you export your tables for review, you can colour code it to show the different levels of matches from the TM. So in theory, a reviewer could look at that and they know from the colour codes what they do or don't need to look at, because if you want things kept the same as previous documents, if they say it's green, right, it's been translated that way before, the translator hasn't changed anything, you can just skip over that, and it makes life a lot easier for them and saves them a lot of time.
Okay. So any questions on how these things work? The idea with this is that this is really how the nuts and bolts of the translation project gets sent out. You know, the guys who have the same software, they will have this software, that's how they'll do their translation, type it in, get sent back. Incidentally, this is generally a good way of just, in two segments, side by side, people can review it that way. But at the same time, we can press a button within the software, and if you sent us an InDesign file to start off with, you can press a button, it will regenerate all this text quickly into the InDesign file, so if your reviewers want to have a look in situ, they get a rough idea. We'll describe later why it doesn't always look great when you regenerate the InDesign file, because often the German is longer than the English, so it doesn't fit in the box. Sorry, German's a long-winded language. But you can, at any point, just quickly press a button. If you put the file in the first place, then the formatted file comes out, and that can help the review just to get a in-context review, or in-situ review. It's
usually a good idea to do it in the Word tables first, though, because it's more time-consuming and therefore costly to, edit your PDF files or whatever it is from your artwork. But if it's done this way first in review tables, and then you export your target files from that, you should have the bulk of your changes in there. And when you're reviewing, say, formatted PDFs, if it's InDesign or whether it's an HTML file, it should really, if any, be minor changes, formatting, hyphenation or something. In theory, there shouldn't be any word changes later on, because otherwise that does cost a lot more.
Background of circuits. Okay. So now just to go on to really get into the one of the sticky questions, which is why would you bother using a translation company? Why not just go out and sort it out yourself? Because you've got a document, you can go online, you can look on a website, you can quickly find a website. There's one called PROS, and that will give you a list of translators. So you can take your document, you can send it out to a translator, and they'll send it back to you, translated. You can send it out to another person if you want, and that will be cheaper. It just will be cheaper than working with us, because a translation company has to pay for its project managers and its project management. So I've just quickly gone through here, trying to add just a quick list of some of the things that the project managers or the translation companies will add to that process. We will, on top of the project management function, so that the company, we assume that you send it to us, we'll meet your deadlines, we'll talk to you, we'll handle your files, we'll talk to you about what the quote should be, we'll try and make sure that we contact the people and we deliver, or any company should deliver on time, and that is what a project management company should do. But specifically, in terms of a translation project, the guys will very carefully keep an eye on file handling and version control. So making sure you don't miss some changes or put changes in and then they get lost later on, and looking at whose revision goes in. That should be something we take over, you can have less of a need to do that. Using the CAT tools and knowing how to extract translatable text, ignoring all the background coding, so you only translate the translatable text and you don't miss any of it, but you don't spend your whole life just fighting your way through the actual background code in an HTML document, for example. We should have, a company should have a whole set of translators ready to go. You don't need to spend time trying to find them. We should know who are the best translators. We should be able to find suitable translators. We should get the quality up. So, really, that should be the value added that we come along with. We know the resource, we should be able to bring that resource in. And then finally, that classic of how to tell the difference about who's the right. So reconciling the differences, chasing down the differences, and eventually making that call, who's version do you take? If you've got two translators who won't agree, somebody's got to get a third party or somebody's going to make a call. So those are some of the things that a management company should come in, or at least face up to the fact that you can do it directly if you have the time. Okay. Some of my colleagues get very nervous about me trying to tell people how long projects take, because projects will change. And, but I thought I'd just try and put in some guidelines into it, so at least you can plan out a project and roughly have an idea of what goes on. So a lot of it depends on the number of words. There are lots of different ways of looking at projects. You can look at the number of documents, you can say each document takes a length of time, and we do jump between sometimes just costing and working on documents per page, or working on how many words. The number of words, and as we've said before, it depends on how many translators. Bring 10 translators into one project, it'll go through a lot quicker. You've got 10 people checking in. One translator, a lot slower, more consistent. How many languages requested? So, looking at your list of languages, there are some obscure languages, some of the African languages. We're lucky if we can find 5 or 6 good translators in the world doing it, so availability becomes a major issue. If you're looking at Latin, Spanish, there's thousands of people out there ready and raring to do it quickly. So it's not just a cost, it is actually, and also the number of languages. If we want to have one good project manager keeping control of your project and you've got 40 languages, they're going to be challenged to get them all through in a day. It just takes time to process files. How many steps? Obviously, if you do 3 review steps, if you've got plan review, you've got regulatory review, each step's going to take 2 or 3 days to get it sent round, processed, brought back, and that's the minimum. It can take longer. And then the final thing, it's always worth getting any changes checked by the translators. Take it back. They're the guys who are meant to know and do the proofreading to the level of, you know, checking spelling. We have had clients who have just taken the ethics committee changes and put it straight in the document and send it out, and we get it back and say, well, where did these things come from? It's spelt wrong. And it's come from that last stage review. So just be careful. So, it's ready to send it through to your guys. So, don't forget those. And then the DTP, well, it all depends on how complicated your projects are, how well you've done your file. Have you done it, and I'll describe that later, have you done your file in a way that works for translation, or is it going to take an awful lot of resetting for DTP? So that's just a guess, 20 pages a day, we can do up to 100. Again, it depends how many people you've got doing it. Okay, next. So that's kind of an overview of a translation project and how we'll run through normal documents. In my simple world, there is no simple fact that everything is either a simple file or a difficult file. But my view of a simple file is something that I can work on, and I don't need somebody else to help me. Okay? So I would say that I am trusted with Word, Excel, PowerPoint. I've made this PowerPoint myself, and then I got it corrected by all my colleagues and taken apart. But I can cope with a PowerPoint. I don't need to go and ask IT for help on a PowerPoint or a Word document. And I can save it, I know where it's saved, I can send it to you, you can send it back, we'll make our own changes. Those are the more simple end of files, and we're in control of those. In design, it depends whether you are one of the lucky people who has InDesign. If not, people will PDF things, send them out, because people can't read the InDesign files. But still, it is and I'm going to get shot for using this word, it's a portable file. It's a file that has everything stuck together. You can save it somewhere, you can attach it to an email, and it gets sent out, and it comes back. It's all in. And FrameMaker and Adobe Illustrator, people aren't using them so much. Pretty much the world is stuck. Does anybody else use those anymore, or does everybody use InDesign in your companies?
I know someone who uses FrameMaker.
Yeah, some.
Yeah,
All depends on
few.
the sponsors.
Yeah, it depends on the sponsor, but it seems to be that most people are moving towards InDesign now. Fine, we can use any, because they all work with the cat tool and go straight in and out. But still, InDesign. So there are different levels of formatting in these. So Word and Excel has almost no formatting. It's just words in cells, whereas InDesign has bucket loads of formatting. But still, they are discrete files. They generally don't have attached files. So you hope they don't, because it makes life easier. What I haven't put up in here is PDFs. Now, there are different types of PDFs. A lot of the time, the PDF is a PDF of a parent file. And the first thing we say is, can you please send us through the original file? Because we can do a lot more with it. We can extract it, we can look for fuzzy matches. PDFs are harder to work with. If it's a really, really hard PDF, maybe a scan of a will, you have no way of accessing that text. If it's a converted PDF, most of the text is accessible. We can cut and paste it out. we can do a quick analysis on it, or we can use the PDF. So there are different levels of PDFs. The hardest thing is maybe a scan of a handwritten response. Some guys did a survey, you get the handwritten response, and literally all we can do with that is send it out to the translators, and they will translate it directly. You can get optical character recognition software, OCR, and that can help grabbing printed text out. I like to say it's pretty useless with handwritten stuff. It can work maybe 95% on printed stuff, which is good for getting a word estimate, but if you're going to use that to translate it, you're going to have to go through that very carefully to check that the character recognition has worked. So it's going to add an extra step. But one way though, these files can be directly imported into our translation memory. They can be handled and controlled by you, the client, and the project managers on their own. You're not needing help from other parts of your company to run this type of project. So these are what I was calling traditional, more simple, and you can flog out the files back and forth by an email, or if you're working in the world of security of your company, you can have secure FTP, and the company can get, I think ours came from the US government at some point, so you can get really good, secure FTP of your files. Okay, so that's one type of project. And one thing we will always talk about, I just put through some of the obvious stuff, why we like working with the original file format, rather than having to put everything into Word and then taking it back again. On the front end, it saves time and costs because you're not preparing a file and then ready to go. You avoid transcription errors, and you can then put the translated text back into the documents, in the final documents. You miss a whole step out. Some of the clients like to work with Word, they're more comfortable with Word. Everybody has Word on their program, on their computer, so sometimes working with the InDesign file means that the project manager is blind to those files because they can't see them. They have to ask somebody to go and convert them to a PDF to see what's going on. So that can be one of the reasons why people keep working with Word, and then you end up cutting and pasting it in the project. But people still do it. So there are different ways. We have that middle ground that we can generate that Word table for review, and everybody can do the review in a nice Word table with a bit of track changes, and then eventually you take it back into your, and I say we, the whole industry uses these CAT tools, so pretty much everybody can do it, it's just whether they give you the option. They talk to you. So yeah, we use the original file format, and then we give you a review table in Word, and everyone's a winner if we can do that. So I then said these are electronic files, and then somebody pointed out that everything is electronic. So I got shot down on that title. What I've now gone for is more complex, which isn't really a proper definition, but we couldn't really think of a proper way of describing it. But what I'm talking about here is HTML files. We've done a project in a JSF file, I don't know what it is, but it came out of somebody's software. And there are software files. So depending, if you're working in an app, you're working in a specific software that runs a device, you will end up having thousands, or not thousands, there are 10 or 20 different types of file formats. That's the most convenient for you to get your data out. If you've got a web page, you can get it out as an HTML file. I don't know if anybody's done this. If you look on any web page, you can right-click and look for a page source. I didn't want to do this because it looks scary. It's got all that code in it. But you can get all kinds of information from that. You actually put the name of who designed the web page in the top there. People put advertising in there. There's all kinds of random stuff. But depending on how you've set your file up, you can just cut and paste that whole HTML into a text file. Off you go. You've got the HTML file. Problem is, all the dependencies, all the links are just not going to work. So you take that out, translate it, put the text back in, look at it on a browser. You don't see all the pictures, you don't see all the formatting, it falls apart. So how you handle that HTML file and the dependencies or the associated attached files becomes more complicated in this type of project. But the big issue is you really need the context of that web page to do the translation properly. You need to do that final step review in situ. You need to be able to see it. So this kind of stuff is more difficult because you can't just open the final file on your computer. You really often have to put it back in. So these are not standalone files, and they often need IT help. So I have a question. Where does your website live? Where do you save your website file? I haven't got a clue from our website. It's on a server somewhere, probably by the company who set up the website for us. So you can't just take these files and save them somewhere and take them back in. You generally have to have an IT support to tell you where to put the files for these things. For your software, for your app, it has to go in somewhere so it can run with the rest of the software. So these kind of projects are more complex, but we're getting more of them coming through. And you know, how do you get the website out? How do you get it back in? Normally you ask IT for help, but if you've got that set up, it's really powerful, because who's doing the editing and the fixing? We've got a software engineer who's good at translation engineering, but he doesn't design your website. So he can fix some things and suggest it, but if he fixes it in a way that completely trashes how your website or your emails work with the rest of your system, your IT guys are going to get a bit stressed, especially if they haven't seen what the changes were. So how do you control who does the fixing? Some companies out there will offer a complete integration where the whole of their software comes into your software, and you spend 3 months getting your IT system linked to their IT system, everything goes in. It's lovely when it works, costs a lot of money up front and time up front, and remember, you're tied in to them once you've done that. So yes, there are some great technology solutions. Your call is whether you do a big technology link, are you going to do enough of that, or do you just go for the simplest file and try and move it towards we send you a file, you send us back the file, we put it in the right place, we then work on it together, which moves it towards a traditional project from let's get everybody's IT departments together. Because I can guarantee getting IT guys to talk means a lot of project management, especially when you're trying to translate English to IT, and then you've got language thrown in as well. It's tricky. And then finally, we've got to get back to transcription. Do you rewrite the whole website for each language? How much of that rewriting goes on? Again, it needs to be in situ to see whether your translator says this is just not working in German, or in French, or in Japanese. So, okay. Talk more a little bit about that later, but everybody wants multimedia. So you've got a website, you want to have a bit more content. I've been told simply by Russ and the guys that if you have some video content in your website, you will get double the Google scoring straight away, and people will love it. So you want to have inserted videos, audio clips, a bit of live feed, some tweets. When you start getting this kind of multimedia thing, there's going to be issues with live interpreting or translation. We've got to think a different way. You just don't have a document you send out and then 3 days later it comes back having been checked by 5 different people, because by then the BBC News website has completely given up on the story. So we can't do the same approach. So, video content. You've basically got 2 choices on it, well, 3 choices. One, you just don't bother and just leave it on there as English. So you've got a lovely translated website and you've got an English video inserted. It's fair enough, half of the BBC website is like that. It just has English clips. Meant to be the cheaper option is a voiceover. No, sorry, subtitles. Somebody's got to generate the subtitles, you've got to maybe do a transcript, generate subtitles in English normally, then translate them, make sure they fit, get the timing right, get the description right, get them burnt in, and then ideally get it reviewed by a local speaker. So it's a bit of a hands-on process. And what I'm trying to say, multi-party, sorry, I should have got that word out, you will like it. What I'm trying to say with that is there's lots of people of different skill levels. It's not just your project manager who's handling a document. You've got the translation, you've got directors, you've got recording, you've got MPEG editing, you've got the whole kind of burning it in, things I didn't know anything about until just a few weeks ago. And then if you go one step further up and you're doing voiceover, you then need a transcription of the English voice. Well, the strongest way to do it is transcribe the English voice, then get it translated, then find a voice to do the recording, get a studio, do the recording, and once the studio's set up, you then get all burnt in. This is quite a complicated process. And then finally, can you get some cultural input? Are the pictures right? You tend not to use the same kind of advertising in the Arabic world as you would in the Western world, just a different cultural feel. So those are the challenges. Here's some little stats. I found these interesting, people told me. If you're going to get transcription of some audio, it normally takes 4 to 8 times longer to translate it per hour than it does. So people are listening to this, they don't just type straight off. Normally, to get it really good, they will do a 5-hour recording can take 20 hours to transcribe just straight into a language. Sometimes you can, if you want to do an estimate, you can say that on average 2.5 words per second. So if you've got an hour's worth of audio, that could come out as 9,000 words. This then takes us back to how much it's going to cost per word on an audio for the translation. These are rough guides. Apparently Spanish is a lot more words per minute. Some languages are a lot fewer words per minute because they're slower and calmer. The best process would be transcribe an audio, translate it, and then we generate the audio in the target language. There is an option, which is about a quarter of the cost, and sometimes it's an appropriate option because you're not really going to use it for other than internal, which is you just take a real-time translation and transcription. So some guy's listening to it in English, and they're writing down a translation immediately into German. Or they're listening to it in German at a conference, and they just generate in English by straight text. And that can be cheaper, but of course it's likely to be lower quality because the guy's basically doing live interpreting into a text. Okay, so those are the options for audio content. But if somebody's asking for a quote, we heard this talk, it was at a conference, it was in German, can we have a transcript in English? There are different ways of doing that. And obviously, more expensive, cheaper, lower quality. Live feeds and text. So if we're looking at tweets and getting your social media translated, obviously it's going to be out of date if you go through putting it all into a file, sending it to a translation company, sending it on. So we've been looking at some of our new ways of working. All our translators have got text phones and text messages, so we can text them your tweet or your text message, they can text it back, if real time getting it back out, because you haven't got time to do the checks. Of course, the challenge is, who's going to review it? If it's being done quickly, what level of kind of social media translation can you do? Can you do text speak? So a text speak in English is going to be hard for a German person translator to understand. So maybe you translate the text speak back out into long speak, gets it translated into German, and then the German shortens it back down into a text. We were saying OMG. How do you translate that if you're German? You've got to first know what it means. So you take that to oh my god, and you translate it and then bring it back to something that's relevant. So, and then live webcasts. Okay, people are doing what live webcasts. I'm doing my presentation to the whole of the company, so I want it to be done in all my different countries on my presentation. CEO is doing this big presentation. You can simultaneously webcast it to 20 different countries, or if you're doing a big product launch. They tend to put a slight delay on it, but you then use interpreters, and you've got no control over interpreters. So we had one where they said the Spanish interpreter sounded like he was a country bumpkin. He had a really country accent. And nothing they could do until afterwards you got the feedback and said this guy is not suitable for whole of Spain, he sounds like he's got a West Country accent. Tricky, couldn't do much about it until later. That wasn't our work, by the way, that was one I was hearing about. But then we don't do much interpreting. And then, yeah, somebody needs to have a look at the technology. Okay, so that's going through the different types of projects and some of the associated challenges. Coffee?
Do you want to start there?
Yeah.
Coffee's ready.
Coffee's ready. So I think we should have a break now, get some coffee, and then we'll go into some of the more final stage stuff after the break.
Actually, got that a minute.
Well, there's still food and one second.
Somebody spotted my mistakes.
Pardon?
Somebody spotted the... We're now just going to go quickly through the last step of a translation project, which technically isn't actually translation, but it is part of the process. So once you've got the text, audio translated, you then want to generate your final file. Now this again is a discussion or decision point for project managers of who actually does this. And we have about a 75-25% split of our clients. Most of our clients get us to do the final content editing or content filling in, DTP if it's a document, or content editing if it's HTML. But one of our big clients does this in-house. They get their own designers to go and cut and paste from our bilingual tables back into their documents, and they get it moving. So it's not a black and white decision. You can make that decision whether you want to do it in-house or do it externally. Yeah, it can be a waste of resource for your internal guys, because those guys are fully trained, they're brilliant designers or they're brilliant editors, they generate text beautifully, they generate documents beautifully. Cutting and pasting may not be the best use of that expensive resource within your company. However, if they don't have enough to do and you want to fill their time up, and this is a good way of, you know, keeping that cost down and having it as an internal resource rather than external cost. So that is a call companies have to make. There is no simple answer. However, it can leave your non-linguist team exposed to tricky language problems because they are not going to be experts in those languages. And there's only so much you can fix by looking in Google Translate and trying to work out which bit of the text is which to decide how you split up a sentence that wasn't split up in the translation, but is split up later. If you start off with your documents in the right format, then we can auto-fill the translation back in, and we can send you back the formatted file, which will then be needing some tidying up by your guys. So it's a kind of two-step thing. If it's the first step can be cutting and pasting all the text into the right place. The second step can be re-editing your file to make it so it works with the new translated text. So a lot of companies will offer the DTP services for pretty well-established text. Only a few will offer the DTP or the digital content editing and layout for the more complex files that I was describing. Some companies will give you a full integrated system. Some will just say we'll do it quick and easy, or we'll do it thing. And then video files. So unless you are a video editing company, and we do have worked with quite a few companies whose main job is to generate video content. So they are more happy to do video editing, and they have recording studios, and they're happy to do subtitling themselves. So when they do it themselves, they're looking to do the least outsource, maybe do the transcription, maybe generate the actual subtitles, and all we're doing is generating the translated subtitles. Then they'll go and put it back on their video content, and then ideally they get that final quality check done after the layout or the video is continued by an in-country speaker, and we can provide those people on a review basis. But sometimes there's no, and a lot of companies I know of who go out there and there's no quality check by a linguist after the layout's done. It's considered there's no issues. Sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't. So I asked our DTP team just to come up with some suggestions of what are causing issues when people do multilingual DTP, and can we come up with just some broad suggestions that you could build into your project to suggest to the guys doing the generation of your marketing materials to avoid the issues in the first place. And here are just a few of the ones they came up with. Try and use formal automatic formatting. So if you can use a style sheet that dictates through the whole document, if you can allow some space so you can get the expansion to cope, so your design is not always filling up a box. If you use text frames and formatting, so use the formatting that is going to automatically put your translated text in the middle. Don't use manual, what I've done on this talk, because all of these, by the way, I just manually put somewhere in the top left when I put my text in. What I should have done is designed a nice master so that text always in the right place, always in that corner. But I'm not very good at that. However, if I was translating it, that could jump all over the place. Whereas if I designed a nice master slide, the formatting would be automatic. Try and use compatible fonts. So that's an easy thing to say. So I said, okay, well, how would you find out whether your font is compatible? That's a really difficult question, because there's thousands of fonts, and there's no list that says these fonts are ultimately going to be good for lots of different languages. One thing the guy said is try to use an established font, try to avoid brand new fonts, because if it's a brand new font that you just found on the internet somewhere, there's a good chance it will not have been set up to be compatible with Greek letters or Russian letters or with Arabic. If it's an established font, there are some websites. There was a Font Squirrel website I found that gave a list of which fonts are relevant to be able to use in different languages. But if you can get your designers to keep to the fonts that are standard, then you won't have so much work, or you won't have inconsistency when the people then have to change to a different font just to get it so it's compatible. And graphics. The classic thing is try not to hardwire text into your graphic. If you can layer it or put it in, it'll work better. So that I pretty much talked through. So I'm going to go through the examples. So here's some examples. This is about the space. So this really does fit in beautifully, and it's designed that it fits just the space. When you've got a shorter word, it's not going to have the same thing. This is, I don't remember which language that one is. It's the word it's for computer in Cyrillic, I think maybe. And it's going to be shorter so you don't get the same graphics. When you find the Greek, it's a longer translation, so you're going to you have to change the font size so you get different font sizes. And then once you've got that space, you've then got to make a decision. Do you change the font size so you're always filling up the gap to be as close as possible to the original, or do you keep the font size consistent, but then some things are going to be looking small, some things are going to look on two lines. So at some point, the team are going to have to make a decision whether you have consistent font size or consistent space filling. I'm not convinced it makes that much difference, but your designers tell me that they're really worried about such things. Alignment of text. So ideally, you use your software to align the text. Here we've got the idea is to get this translation caption into the middle of this nice circle. You can just use your arrows, your cursor arrows, just shift it in manually till it looks nice. Or you can use a function that's somewhere in there which will put it in, and it's an example of getting the formatting of the function to automatically put it in. So that, okay, this was the translation caption. When you want to translate into something, if the translated text is too big, you lose it completely. The text is in there, but it's just too big for the box. You have to make the box bigger. And then this was making the box bigger, but because it wasn't centered, it then shoves it over to the left. Whereas if you had the crisscross and it was automatically putting, when it gets translated and it's a longer translation, it will then automatically put it into the middle. So it means you have to do less effort when you put the automatic translation fill in, if you're using centering formatting. Text. So, the same thing, we're looking to get a bulleted list on 2 lines. And I'm told that the worst way of doing it, I'm sure some of you, is just to find your sentence, find out where the gap's going to be, put a return in, and then tab across the next line. Of course, the problem with that is when you translate it, for a start, it sees these two as 2 different sentences. So your translation memory has a nightmare. Your search and replace has a nightmare because it sees them as 2 different sentences. And your translated text will not always want to split here. It may want to go onto 3 lines and it may want to split somewhere else. So by doing that manual formatting, here we haven't got it all lined up. Here we've actually used an indent, which is okay, pulls it all across, but it's all still 1 sentence. But what I'm told, the ideal situation over here is to use an internal style sheet for bullets where it all defines so that whenever the translated text goes in, it automatically fills in nicely. So apparently it is good text practice for your DTP guys to go because they're using the automated setup rather than the manual setup. Fonts. So the word computer, when you come out to a font that doesn't support it, you start getting these square boxes. It's very frustrating because then you have to go back and change all the fonts in that thing. This is a font that does take on the Slovak. Here's the Greek one with the same font, totally not supported for all but the 1 letter alpha that got through. So then you have to go over to another font. So you've used 3 different fonts just to get those 2 translations to work. So, and then this is the issue with images. So over here on the left we've got an image where they've hardwired in the caption. But of course the caption is text, so when you translate your image you then have to try and wipe out the text to translate it. But of course you wiped it out because you can't get it away from the picture. So on this kind of detailed picture it's going to be a nightmare. So what you would ask your team to do when they're generating stuff from the start is to try and use a layered picture, translation caption on top. Using the software functions that are designed for translation means that that will be extracted for a start a lot more easily by the software, get translated and then automatically put on top. You haven't trashed your image. So, okay. So then this is just, it seems obvious, but a lot of people aren't doing it. This is digital content editing. So once you've got some translated files in a nice bilingual word table, ideally, or sometimes just in a Word document, another Word document translated. And then you do your artwork file, you generate your website, and start looking at your website. We have automatic fill-in software. This was the Conversis magic, yeah, right. Automatic fill-in software that will make it quicker to match those 2 things up. And you end up with a nicely formatted, translated HTML file. The alternative is you can just take the translated files, use your own website management system, and cut and paste them across. Okay. The advantage we were pointing out is that we have a software that will do that. It acts as your website management system because it imports your website into our CAT tool, and you can then use all these lovely matching tools to do it quicker. So yeah, as I say, you can do it by cut and pasting. And then finally, the tricky part is this extracting the files from your server and putting them back in. We have one client that actually uses something called Bitbucket. And I thought Bitbucket was just a file transfer program, but it isn't. What it can do is you can set it up so that once you put the file back in, a little robot goes along, grabs the file, puts it onto their staging server, you password your way into the staging server, and the file you've put in there is then linked to the system, so that all its dependency files then actually update across the staging server. So once you've password protected it, you can then immediately look at how the translated file would look on that staging server, how the website would run. Then you can make a list of things that need fixing. This link doesn't work, this image you're pulling from somewhere else in the corporate image box has some text in, it's still in English. Do you want to generate a new image on your banner? Do you want to not bother, because it's the branding for the whole thing? So you can, working with your company, set it up so that the translated files are very quickly put into your system, and then you can do an in situ review of how the translation would look in your software or in your website. And that can really add value and speed things up. So yeah, this is just saying the in situ situation, images and banners, videos, and menus, and other little consistencies like that. And sometimes we can actually do the editing of that HTML file to make it so it works in the language. Sometimes it's better, more convenient for the client's IT department to go and fix it. The other beauty with things like Bitbucket, I'm told, and that was all news to me, is that it gives a complete record of who's changed what. So again, if we've done some fixes to get it so it works with the language, if your IT department want to come along and say, hold on, what did they do, what have they fixed, what have they messed around with, it's got a complete record of who did what. So again, you're doing consistency and file tracking, track changes. Okay, yeah, so this is pretty much what I said earlier about how you can either do the stuff yourself for a video transcription or video translation, or you can get one company to do the whole thing and just burn it all in. You just give them a video, a JPEG, sorry, an MPEG, and they send it back to you. That's your call. Same with the audio. With live feeds, one thing that I'd never even come across was that if you get interpreters to do a conference or do a video, and then you're going to record it, like I'm being recorded and streamed live, at that stage you have to start paying performers' rights, or the rights for those interpreters. They have a right to be paid a fee for their work that is going to be used in your video. So if you do what we're doing just to get things on social media, to get things a nice video to put on your website, just be aware when you hit translators, they are recording artists effectively and have a degree of rights over their interpreting. So just keep an eye on that and just pay the fee. About 160 quid, I think, per interpreter, per recording. Okay, so again, this is kind of controversial because this does not cover every opportunity and every cost. The best way of getting a cost for a project is to contact a company, ask them to put a ballpark quote together, because they will think about what's involved and always think about if there are other steps that haven't been discussed openly. But I thought I'd give you just some ideas of how much it costs to work with a translation service provider. So this is not the cost directly with the translators. You can find them on the web if you want. But in general, a translation is going to be between 10 and 20 pence a word. 20 pence is the top end, and that's really looking at technical translations and the expensive languages. Examples of expensive languages: Finnish, Swedish, anywhere in Scandinavia. Trying to get them to work quickly is hard work. They don't work weekends very often. You know, they are, that's going to be more expensive end, 17 pence a word or something like that. Some of the African languages or Afrikaans languages, the different, more less common ones tend to be quite expensive. Other languages that are expensive in?
Chinese, Arabic, Japanese, Hebrew.
Japanese, definitely, yeah. Chinese, some of the you can get some of the local agencies to do cheaper, but again, it's going to be tricky to get good quality. You have to fight hard. Okay, so that's translation. Going into translation memories, so Emma very well described what a fuzzy match is and a repetition. There is then a sliding scale, depending on whether you've got a translation memory that can be used and whether we can analyse that. You can look at analysing it against a document against the translation memory and maybe come down with 50%, so you can cut the cost of the translation by up to 50% or even less. If it's a straight repetition or if it's a fuzzy match, maybe 85% or 70%, you tend to look at how good the match is, and you can get a graded cost. So 1,000 words of your 2,000 word document are brand new, so they're at full price. 500 words are fuzzy matches, so they're at 85% price, and 500 words are full matches, so they'd be at 50% price. You tend to, though, sometimes always get a cost to just check it, because you want the translator not just to leave it there, you want them to actually go and have a look to make sure that it is a good use of the translation memory. Okay. Revision, rule of thumb, normally costs about a third of the cost of the translation. So again, it can be charged per word or it can be charged per hour, but you normally look at 1,000 words per hour, so you just change one to the other. But really we're looking at a third the cost, so between 3p and 6p per word. Okay, DTP, again, this all depends on how complicated your DTP is and how well your guys have made an effort to make it so that it needs a lot of changes or not very much changes. But a rough rule of thumb is 15 to 20 pounds per page if we're doing the cut and pasting. If you just give us a word table and a document, we've got to find the translation and cut and paste it in. If you gave us the InDesign document at the very start of the project, or the HTML file, and we do an automatic population of that document, and then all we're doing is editing the file, then you can get a lot cheaper. It goes down to 7 to 12 pounds per page for the auto filled in text. So that's the saving if you use the file all the way through, because the text is automatically put in there. Digital content editing, I put it in brackets because we're really just getting started on this, and it does depend on how big your web page is and how deep you're going and how much time it takes to do that. But we're suggesting something around £40 per email per web page if it's complicated, if it's long, to take a text and fill it in and take it all the way across. But that really is still just being established, and it's just a ballpark. As we described, we do a lot of project management, so sometimes we put 10% on top of all those costs above there to look at the time it takes to chase the documents around, to prepare files, to do the project management tasks. And then depending on whether there's a lot of file preparation, if we're reviewing the changes, and we've got a lot of changes that are coming through in an ethics committee, there's a lot of changes to look at in the medical world. Reconciliation of the back translation, these are things that are going to be charged per hour to see whether we're spending a lot of time chasing down those changes. Okay, so these are not total costs that we're going to use for everything, but give you a rough idea. So if you've got a project, you can get an idea of what you think it's going to cost. Okay, so I thought I'd list some of the main main technologies that are being used right now in translation projects. I've put translation management system, actually what people want, I was corrected and I didn't correct this slide, that's more of a CAT tool, so a computer-aided translation tool. So that would be a tool that just really looks at the translation step, separates it out, puts them into tables, and it helps the translators and us get in to do that translation. Translation memories we've talked about further up, and that is a technology that a lot of people are using, and it can save you money and it can improve your quality, so it's well worth looking into if you can build up a memory. Workflow management system, so this is what some people would call a translation management system, a TMS, so that's why I got told off for it. But this is really a system that will do the whole thing, from start to finish. And then machine translation, I'll talk about it quickly. So just going into the issues with the translation management system, the idea here is we've bought one called Plunet, which we've named Portico. It manages the whole process from monitoring the customer relationship system, forward and back, generates quotes, it can look into transfer of files, allocation of resource, which is actually the translators normally, tracking of documents, and you want to have a complete, strong tracking of your documents, and then invoicing and feedback. All goes into one system. One of the interesting things is that a lot of companies will tout this as a great advantage, the automatic transfer of files. So they say, we've got this great system where you can just dump your files into our server, somebody will pick it up, it'll be translated, and it'll come back to you in 2 days' time. And this is a great advantage. Yeah, and no. So in some occasions, yeah, absolutely. If it's a commodity-based turnaround, you want your translation going in there, and it works well, that's working fine. We have done a different approach. We believe it's better, but it's not the only approach, where we have project managers people. So you're talking to a person, and they will manage the transfer of those files and give you personal feedback on how your project's going. If you have a complicated project and you're always trying to, the company is making you log on to go and find out where your file is and where it's going and what's going on, I feel that makes you do more work and you have to learn their system. So whilst it may have advantages, for the actual users, a lot of the feedback is negative about these automatic workflow systems. So yes, it can improve traceability, or it looks like it improves traceability because it's all automated. Bottom line is most project managers are pretty good at tracking what's going on. They're good at that. What they don't like is sending something and then getting no response, and having nobody to talk to and not having a name. So for the actual project managers, a lot of the time, some of the advantages of a very automated system are not real, but they look good to the guy selling it. So that's my view. That's, by the way, my first personal opinion. That is really because we think personal project management is more important than a great automated system. But there are advantages for both sides, and other companies do have more automated computer flow systems. And machine translation. So Google Translate, you can take your text, stick it in there, you can try and translate it straight back again, and you end up with something completely different. So it's not going to be consistent yet, but it is there. And there are ways of using it. And there are websites I've clicked onto which say translating to every language, and all they're doing is using an automated feed to a Google Translate, and their website comes up in all these different languages. So one NHS type website that was using that. So it is an option, and it will quickly get your website or your thing available in the languages, but it's not always going to be perfect. You may need your user to start having to find their way through what it actually means, and you then are always putting up this kind of image that you're not the highest quality supplier because you haven't personally gone out and checked those translations. So it is suitable, okay, for low quality work. And then there's this phrase called gisting. And I didn't really think it existed, but I came across it first in the world of legal. So patents, or patents or any work. If a legal company is looking at all these different documents, and they're in different languages, and they're thinking this could be crucial to my case, but they don't want to spend thousands of pounds on getting this massive document translated perfectly. So they send it off for what's called gisting, just getting the gist of the document. And it comes back and it's pretty low quality translation, and it's quick, and it's one thing. But at least they can read what's in the paper and then go, actually that's no use to my case. Oh, but that's going to be superb, it looks like it's perfect. Then they send it off for a full translation. Because if you're going to court, lawyers cost more than translators, so you get a really good translation done. So you can use machine translation for gisting, just get to feel whether it's going to work or not. But then I would recommend, and it can be a good way of checking blind translation, but normally at the moment, for good quality translation, you want to get at least a good revision done to check that it's worked. With a strong revision, it can be worked, but then some people just object to it. I had one interesting input from a company, an Arabic company at the localization conference, who said they had two sets of translators. Ones who were older, and literally she didn't care, she just said the older people I use for the old style, where we have a translator and a reviewer, and it's people-based. And I've employed a complete new set of people who I use machine translation with, and then they're the revisers. Because I cannot get my older translators to work with the machine translation. They spend so much time moaning and complaining that this machine translation is awful, that they don't do the job. So she has two sets of people, and depending on how she thinks the project needs, she'll send the work to the two different systems. But within one company, they have a machine translation first step, and a bunch of revisers who are trained to revise from machine and rewrite. And yeah, the revisers are a lot more work when they use a machine translation, but of course, the machine's cheaper than people. So it's being used, and it's well worth watching for the future, but you just need to think about whether it can help. Okay, so one worked example. I'm afraid you guys who have been to the previous workshop have seen it before, but this is one I just got from the web, so I haven't got permission, so if anybody from Dr. Wolf comes in, I didn't get permission to use it, but it was just on the web. I just went and had a look on their marketing, and I knew about this because I'd been given a presentation by a Dr. Wolf guy in my previous life when I was a scientist. And he said, in Germany we tell things how they are. You don't mess around with it. So this is a hand cream, and the hand cream is called linola, which is one of the oils, one of the constituents, fat. That's the name of your cream. So, and then I got this from the thing. This is a little introduction. Since 1956, it's been developed. Off we go. And then this is their little graphic, schematic. So, okay. First thing I did is I took the text, shoved it into Google Translate as I cut and pasted it straight from there, and I got this back. Developed early as 1956, linola fat. It's still highly topical. It's precisely in children with atopic dermatitis. This cream is widely used because the treatment then without cortisone is possible. So it's split up the different sentences, it's killing us, and it's not great. One thing was interesting is, if you just go back to the original statement, take out some of the dodgy formatting that was in my cut and paste, you can get a lot better translation still from Google Translate just by changing the formatting on the input. So now we've got developed as early as 1956, it's still highly topical, it's precisely in children with eczema, so now we've gone from topical dermatitis to eczema. This cream is often used because it's then possible without cortisone. So now we get a bit more to the meaning of it, just still using Google Translate, but it's not perfect. So what's one of the issues? Okay, does anyone know the two meanings of topical? Topical in normal terminology is all about it's relevant, and I'm pretty sure that's what they're trying to say here, because it was developed in '56, but it's still very relevant. However, in the medicine world, a topical cream is, or topical medicine is anything that goes on the skin. So if your eye gel is putting the stuff through the skin, which incidentally just puts into your bloodstream, it's the same as taking the tablets. It doesn't actually go locally, but it doesn't matter. So the use of the word topical is an issue here, and machine translation is not going to grab that, whereas you should have, hopefully your translator will come back and say, can we use a different word than topical, because we need relevant, or is still relevant. So they wouldn't just use that word because it's got double meanings, and it's a challenge. Okay, so here's a nice little graphic at the top here. We've got the Mr. Lino from the Linola, and what he says is, if your skin is itchy and dry, is red and inflamed, then use some cream with lots of fat and plenty of water. And this is where I start suggesting that maybe we need some very serious localization, not just translation, because we don't call our creams fat-containing creams. E45 barely mentions that it's got fat in it. They've all got fat in them, that's what they're basically made of, lamb's fat and some other stuff. But in England we would not translate and advertise with the real stuff. We'd move across and start coming up with a nice medical, it's the opposite to what you said on your example. We like to use medical terms in the farms, in the E45 and the other ones, Neutrogena. They all sound medical, so we wouldn't talk what it is. Actually, what they've done is they've just taken the name out. They just stop using fat and they go moisturiser or emollients. That word. Okay. And then the second point I'd like to point out is that these cartoons are very much Germanic cartoons. I'm thinking that they remind people in Germany of kids' cartoons that were common when I was over there. So they're comfortable cartoons to work in Germany, but they're not so comfortable in the UK because we don't have similar cartoons like that. I had a couple of cartoons here. This is Werner, a classic German. This was from an English thing. So there are similarities in the way they do the noses, but there are differences in the way people do cartoons in different countries. So I would suggest, really, at this stage, you need to do a bit of transcreation. You need to be coming up with a completely different picture and a completely different advertising gimmick, because the translation itself doesn't work. We could fix it, we could just fix the words and do a bit of localization, but really this is something that's shouting out for transcreation. Is that me? So that's the end of my talk. I'm now going to, any questions? Any issues that are burning to be discussed? Okay, I will hand over to my colleague Roberto, who's going to do some future gazing.
Okay, my name is Roberto. I work in Conversis in technology, but I have been working in the past years in research in machine translation and language tools for the European Commission. So I will try here to show you what I see could be some of the advances in the future in the translation and the language field. But of course this is just guessing, and as such this is my view. You could have a different view from somebody else. To start talking about the future, I would like to look at the past first and see how the translator worked in the past And here we have our translator. This is a translator that is working in a book, which supposedly has the target language, and here has a book with the source language. So it's not very different to what translators do today. Basically, they do the same. This is 300 years after Christ was born. He was a translator, but he also was a priest. Don't know, perhaps the salary was not very good as a translator, but he was very famous at that time. He translated many books, and probably he also has some reference book in here. I don't know. So it's similar to what the translators do today. Religion has been linked to translation. This is not surprising for centuries. And the Bible is a very good example of translation because it has been translated in many different ways. It has been translated word for word, so that is a literal translation. It's similar to what translator could do today. It has been translated thought for thought, so this could be similar to what a standard translation is today. And it has been translated as paraphrase, meaning rephrasing the sentence in the original document. This could be like a creative translation, not like transcreation, but sort of transcreation. So Bible is a very good example of translation. So translation is not a new business, it's something that has been going on for centuries.
How many versions is that? Is that like 20 or?
Many. These are not all
That's
the
not
versions,
it,
but
yeah.
many. I mean, many versions for the Bible. I mean, it's a very good example of translation. And I think the reason I placed the slides from the past in here is because to talk about the future, we need to learn from the past. And it's very important that we understand that this profession is very old. Translation is a very old profession. This is another example. This is from the Rosetta Stone. It's a stone which was found that had 3 different languages and was used to translate, for instance, in this case, this was a work by Champollion, the name Cleopatra. I placed this slide in here because this is similar to what machine translation actually do today. So these are words, these are just characters, but machine translation do a similar kind of matching to try to extract the text and provide a proposal in the target language. So the basis of machine translation was there many centuries ago. Now, what do the translators do today? Well, there are some similarities to what I have shown in the past. They have reference document. We saw this in the first picture. They have local terminology, search dictionaries, glossaries that the customers provide. They do some offline research. They might look like the priest that I showed in the first image in previous documents to try to understand the text and see the context. But they also have a plethora of other tools or things that they do besides translating. It could be detection, it could be machine translation. Translators do marketing and social networking because they need to sell themselves. They do online terminology search. They go to the internet like all of us do, and they try to find out the translation for a term, for instance. They do training because they need to train on new tools. New tools are appearing in the market every day. And of course they don't know how the tool works, so they need to train. They need to get certifications because for some customers it's important that the translator have a certification. My colleagues have spoken about CAD tools and translation memory. They need to know them because most translators nowadays work with CAD tools and translation memories. The translation memory, like Mark mentioned, is just a database of source and target. Can have many other fields, but basically source and target. And they do online research. Of course, the priest that I showed couldn't do online research because there wasn't internet available at that time, but nowadays he would probably do online research if he was alive now. They do collaborative translation. This is something that is happening today. They do project management because, of course, they have to quote and they have to invoice, like we do in the translation agency. And they have to solve issues like file format, DTP, and whatever else. So we see that the translator is not only about, the translator work is not only about translation, it's about many, many other things. So the translator is a very busy person, a very, very busy person. Is this enough to cope with the amount of information that we have today? No. We don't have enough translators in the world to translate all the amount of information that is available. And we will never have, because the amount of information is growing at a much faster pace than the amount of translators. So it's impossible. Just to give you an example, every minute of the day, we have, for instance, 4 million searches in Google, 2.5 million new pieces of information in Facebook, and I'm talking about a minute in here. Nearly 500,000 uses of Swipe. We have 300,000, more than 300,000 WhatsApp messages. So and we can continue with this and add new applications that are being developed every day. So the amount of information that we are receiving every day and that is probably need to be translated is much larger than the community of translators. It is estimated that there are something like 300,000 translators worldwide. 300,000 translators translating 2,000 words per day. Clearly, this is not enough. So, what are the efforts that the industry is doing now to try to cope with the demand from translation? Collaborative translation. So that means that many translators in different locations collaborate to produce a single piece of text. Sharing translation and terminology, this is very important because what has been translated in one company or in one place could be useful for somebody else. Why not share it? In particular, if it's already public, if you already have it in your manuals which are available for somebody else. There are efforts to work in authoring, translation, and revision in parallel. Authoring is the creation of the source content in a structured manner so that when the translator receives the text, there are more sentences that are structured in a way that is easier to translate and probably have more repetitions, more similarities with previous translations. So if we do this in parallel, imagine somebody is creating the text, somebody is translating it somewhere else in the world, and somebody is revising the text somewhere else in the world at the same time. This is perfectly possible. We have the tools, we have the technology. It's just that it's very difficult to do, but it's possible, perfectly possible. There are efforts to learn from other industries. Quality is one example. The automotive industry, the aviation industry already have gone through the process of implementing quality systems. In the translation industry, this is relatively new. We are still developing a standard, a quality standard for translation, universal quality standard for translation. So cooperation between the different industries is very important because we don't want to repeat the wheel. We can learn from others. And then working together, customer agencies, translators, researchers, and developers. This is not only important for our industry, but for any industry. If developers are not aware of what the customers want and develop isolated, or researchers research on topics that are not relevant to the industry, applied research will not be really applied research. Other efforts: touch translation, voice recognition, and eye tracking, plus artificial intelligence, is driving big data analysis. Big data is a concept meaning large amounts of information, large databases. So we now have large databases, we have a lot of information. This information is stored somewhere, and we can combine technologies in order to try to gather information from big data. Deep learning, I will talk about deep learning in the next slide, because this is one of the hot topics in the industry. Disruptive technologies. These are technologies that could have a big impact on our industry. Mobile computing, of course, we have different devices, and the different devices have different requirements and different information. So these industries, this mobile computing could mean that we would need to translate in a different way, perhaps, for different devices. Permanent connectivity. The new generations are used to permanent connectivity. You don't dial a modem like we were talking with somebody here before. You have permanent connectivity for all your devices. Body embedded nanotechnology. That means in your body you will have devices that will provide information permanently. There was a door developed in the United States a few months ago, and this door has a camera, and the camera is activated the first time that the baby presses the button, and it will record immediately everything that the doll sees, and it will upload it to a website. So when the baby grows, we'll have the full vision of what he was seeing since he was a baby. Of course, this has some privacy issues and whatever, but you see that the technology is really moving very, very, very fast. Wearables like smart bands, watches, glasses, even though Google Glass is already stopped, the development of Google Glass is not anymore, seems to be something that Google wants. Clothing, embedded things in your clothing, and the furniture could automatically inform of events. All this may need translation, because this means information that is sent somewhere. A universal translator that is similar to Star Trek. This is a goal that has been a goal for many years. It's not something we are going to reach, but it's a goal for the research community. Roll-up digital screens, so means that we will have digital screens that we could stretch and roll up and place everywhere and leave in our pockets, and this will mean that we will require information from those screens, that information will need to be translated again, because if we go to another country with this screen, we will need to see the information in our language. Disruptive trends. Okay, web rooming will become more common than showrooming. Millennials, people that have been born between 1977 and 2000, prefer it. So they prefer to shop on the web than shop or going to a physical shop. So what will happen to the physical shops? I don't really know, but this is happening now. Younger generations use privacy as a currency, so they exchange privacy for something else, a program, a feature, something that they can do. So traditional view in privacy, my view in privacy, is not relevant anymore. They have a different view in privacy, different to us. And we have a lot of other information in here, which are trends that are going to change the way that we work in our industry. Open source in translation, this is something that is happening right now. We pay for the tools that we use, but open source tools are becoming more and more important. In our industry, we are not used to open source tools, but this is a trend that is growing, and probably in a few years, open source tool will be commonplace, and we will not have to pay for a translation tool. Why translator won't be replaced soon? And I say soon because, like for instance, professions like bell repair, I don't know how you call it in English, when the people that repairs bells for the churches, the old churches, well, bells right now are digital, or so they don't need somebody to repair the bell because it's a speaker. But so the people that work at repairing bells are not needed anymore. They need to convert to something else. Virtual reality will require our service as translators and interpreters. So machine translation is not good for that. Humans understand concepts. Computers don't understand a concept. I will show that later. Persuasive technologies require human translation. These are technologies that are used in marketing mainly, but not only. This fluency is something that is stopping voice recognition from going mainstream. I mean, in your telephone, you probably have some kind of voice recognition software, but this voice recognition software doesn't really work very well. If you speak fast or if you speak like you speak normally, it will probably not catch the meaning of what you are talking. And this is because of this fluency. The has, whatever, the expression that we do while we talk, the computers are not able to recognize this very easily. They will in the future probably, but they are not now. So, what could be the future? I mean, I see translation, text and voice embedded in every device. So translation will be like standard for us. It's not now, but it will be. Multimodal, translation will be multimodal, multi-device, and multi-source, meaning it will be available at the same time in many devices, from many sources, and it could be even embedded in the brain, so you could probably, instead of talking like I am talking, transmit your thoughts to a computer or to a device using only the brain. That is being tested in some applications. For instance, for disabled people, they use different kind of connections that allow them to move things. From that to a full brain-to-computer interaction, it's just a matter of time, but we will arrive there. Automatic translation of adapted content based on profile recognition means that the marketing or what you see will be adapted to you. So devices will be able to recognize that you are you and provide information based on your preference. This is already happening because Google, for instance, is recording everything that you search for and is sending this information to other companies which are using this information to place ads on the computer without you knowing. And show the information that they think it is important for you. But this will grow and will grow and go. At the end, all the information that you see, or most of the information that you see, will be adapted to you. I don't know if this is good or bad. I'm not making a judgment in here. I'm just saying that this is probably going to happen. Real-time, high-quality, cross-language information retrieval. This is in the web right now. When you search in Google or whatever, you search in your language and you receive a list of results in your language. Cross-language information retrieval allows you to search in your language and receive results that are present in other language. So if you search for something that interests you, you could receive results that are present in a Japanese site or a Chinese site or a French site, without you translating anything or knowing that language, because it will be all automatically translated and the search will be automatically translated. Real-time on-demand translation. This is possible nowadays. There are right now services like telephone interpreting, which are approaching that line. translation will go that route too in the future. So now I'm going to talk about this technology that I was mentioning before. This is present, this is now. This is probably one of the hottest topic in the research community in natural language processing, meaning the interaction between the human language and the computers. Deep learning. Deep learning was conceptually created 6 years ago, more or less, 8 years at the most. Somebody thought that we could create something similar to the human brain. So a set of scientists created subprograms called neural network, neural because it's similar to the neurons present in our brain, that are really a set of subprograms that can iterate on themselves and learn. So this is related to artificial intelligence. Creating this, they have been able to adapt these algorithms to image recognition, natural language processing, information retrieval, speech recognition, and multimodal processing. All these are related to our field, but there are other applications in the medical fields, in the patent industry, in marketing, in many other fields. I mean, this is just a view of what interests the translation community. These are acquisitions of companies by the big companies. These are small companies that were acquired by those, and they were working in deep learning. So this is something that is also moving the industry. One application of deep learning, I don't know if you have seen it, I don't know if you have it in your phone, but you can point out to a sign or to a text, even to a menu in a restaurant, and it will be automatically translated. This was available before deep learning, but it's much better now that deep learning is being used. Deep learning has improved machine translation. So it's not something that has one application, but has many applications. And one of them is machine translation, or in this case, optical character recognition. This is another application of deep learning in translation. So in this sentence, for instance, you have Indira Gandhi, and you have Mrs. Gandhi. Okay, the deep learning software is able to recognize that Indira Gandhi and Mrs. Gandhi is the same person. You have Mohandas Gandhi and you have Mahatma Gandhi. The deep learning software is able to recognize that they are the same person. Machine translation cannot do that. So this is new. This is something that this set of algorithms can do that was not possible before. Deep learning can recognize an image. So this is an image, and this is what deep learning has created based on that image. So this is text that was created by a software just looking at that image. So this is similar to what we do with our eyes. These are other examples. This is the text in here. I don't know if you can read it, but there is a description of what is happening in the image. And this is very impressive. I mean, this was not possible before. Not with that accuracy, anyway. Basically, what the software does is that identify pieces of images in the screen and try to compare this with the database of images that is present somewhere in the location that the software is installed, and based on that, associate a text to that image, and then build sentences. So the final sentence for this is a woman holding a camera in a crowd. So this is very good, actually. So it could be used to identify.
Is there actually a cat there?
No.
Or is that just her hair?
No, it's a hair, but it's a.
I was trying to work out if
Where
it's a
the
cannon.
It's a kind of
No,
camera.
that would have been a good one.
So it's not really a cat, it's just her hair.
Yeah. What are the limitations of this
Yeah.
technology? Well, this is a limitation. What do you see here? What is your impression of this image? Anybody can tell me what do you think is going to happen? Yes. The, most of us will say that the cat is going to eat the fish sooner or later. I mean, computer cannot tell you that. The computer will tell you, I see a cat and a fish in a tank bowl or something like that, but that is just a description. But the concept of what is happening in the picture, computers are not able to do that, and they will not be able to do that in the next future. So this is one of the limitations of the technique. But, well, everything has limitations. I mean, do we have time for real-time exam?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I will show you one of the applications. Okay. Okay, I will. These are examples that are present in a website that allow you to test the technology. So here, okay, it is starting to work. So it's trying to identify a number, a set of numbers. This set of numbers. In the red, you see this is real time. So in red, you see errors, and in green you see the correct number being identified. So you see that 5 is being identified as 5, 1 is being identified as 1, 9 is being identified as 9, 0 as 0, 4 as 4. So this is handwritten text recognition in real time. This is very difficult, it's a very difficult task. And this software is able to do it because what it's doing is splitting every part of the image in many different sets, and then associate this with a database that has of numbers and pieces of images. So right now we have all the numbers correctly identified. So this can be used for optical character recognition of handwritten text, which is a very, very difficult task.
Is that grading its certainty as well, Roberto? Like if it's
Yes,
you
you have all the details in there. Yeah.
yeah.
What it's doing. I mean, this is working real time. This is the code, and this is how it is working, and the graph, how it is working, and the accuracy. So I mean, you have all the information there of what it's doing. There are other examples which are also. Let me see if I can have. This is also very interesting. This is good for marketing, for instance. This is predicting the Twitter trends, and it tells you the new. You can input a tweet or whatever, and it will tell you neutral tweets regarding that tweet, negative tweets, and positive tweets, and will show you that in real time. So you in real time can tell how your tweets are doing in the tweet board. So this can be applied to many fields, including translation, machine translation. So, but not only to that. For instance, you could have a text with images, and it could recognize the text within the image. Something that Mark was showing, that you need to separate in layers. Well, with this, you don't even need to do that. You could separate the text and the image and recreate the image. It can. There is a software in there. Here, I don't know if I can find it, but it can recreate an image. Even I don't know if it's in here. Image identification. I don't know if it is. So this is good as any other techniques. It has limitation, but so I can choose an image. So this is the identification of the image, and one thing that computer can do that we are not very good at identified is identifying the breeds, for instance, of the cat. I don't have any idea of the breeds of the cats, but computers do that, and this tool allows you to do that. So one of use could be to identify the breeds. So this is my take on the present and the future, and some small view on the past. And I hope that you have found it interesting. Thank you very much.